So there's this absolutely wild development happening right now with the Toronto Blue Jays and the Japanese baseball market, and honestly, this could end up being one of the most significant moves the organization makes this entire offseason. Roki Sasaki's teammate, Tatsuya A, is making some pretty bold statements about his future, and the Blue Jays suddenly find themselves in a position where they might actually have a legitimate shot at landing this guy. What makes this even more fascinating is that EI is saying he doesn't want to join the Dodgers, he wants to beat them. That's a complete departure from what we've seen over the last few years, where it felt like every elite Japanese player just automatically ended up in Los Angeles. The quote that's getting everyone's attention came through Japanese media, and E basically said that while it would be fun to play alongside guys like Ohtani, Yamamoto, and Sasaki on the Dodgers, what would actually mean more to him is beating that super team and winning a World Series against them. That's the kind of competitive fire you want to see from a professional athlete, and it immediately changes the conversation about where he might land when he comes to Major League Baseball. If he's genuinely serious about not wanting to be part of the Dodgers' collection of Japanese stars, then teams like Toronto suddenly become way more relevant in these discussions. What's really interesting here is that EI also mentioned he'd prefer to join a team that doesn't already have a Japanese player on the roster. He wants to be the guy representing Japan on whatever team he joins, which makes total sense from a personal branding and legacy standpoint. When you think about which teams could realistically beat the Dodgers and don't currently have a Japanese player, the Blue Jays check both boxes perfectly. They just went to the World Series and came within 2 outs of winning the whole thing against that same Dodgers team. If you're looking for the most realistic path to defeating Los Angeles, Toronto has to be near the top of that list. Now let's talk about what kind of player the Blue Jays would be getting if they somehow pull this off. Tatsuya A just finished the 2025 season in Nippon Professional Baseball with an ERA under 2 and a WHIP below .9. Those are absolutely elite numbers regardless of what league you're playing in. Obviously, there's going to be an adjustment period when he transitions to Major League Baseball, but we've seen enough Japanese pitchers make the jump successfully to know that elite stuff translates. When Yoshinobu Yamamoto came over from NPB, he had similar numbers, and after adjusting to the majors, he's been exactly what the Dodgers hoped he'd be. The projection for A's contract is somewhere around 6 years and $150 million, which would put him in that same tier as Max Fried from last year's free agent class. You're essentially paying for a top-of-the-rotation arm who's entering his prime years, and while there's always risk involved with international signings, the upside here is massive. Bob Nightingale compared him to Yamamoto in terms of stuff and potential, though he was careful to note that A isn't Yamamoto yet. But the fact that the comparison is even being made tells you everything you need to know about how scouts and front offices view his talent level. One criticism that keeps coming up with EI is his walk rate, but honestly, when you look at the actual numbers, that concern seems overblown. His overall career walk rate in NPB was around 4.5 per 9 innings, but over the last 2 seasons, he's cut that down dramatically to 3.6 and then 2.5 last year. When you're posting a WHIP under .9, you're clearly not walking enough guys to hurt yourself. The improvement trajectory is exactly what you want to see from a young pitcher who's refining his command as he gains experience. Here's where things get even more interesting for the Blue Jays. There was this major boxing event in Japan recently, and the Toronto Blue Jays logo was plastered all over the venue. We're talking about corner posts on the boxing ring, signage throughout the arena, the whole 9 yards. At first, people assumed the Blue Jays had paid for this advertising as part of some strategic push into the Japanese market, but it turns out this was actually unpaid advertising. The organizers of the boxing match approached the Blue Jays and asked if they could feature the logo, and Toronto obviously said yes. That might not sound like a huge deal on the surface, but think about what it represents. The Blue Jays didn't seek this out. Japanese media and event organizers came to them because Toronto is now relevant in that market. The World Series run put the team on the global stage, and Japanese fans watched the Blue Jays go toe-to-toe with the Dodgers super team. That exposure created genuine interest in Toronto as an organization, and now we're seeing the early signs of that manifesting in unexpected ways. You don't see the Reds logo or the White Sox logo getting featured at major sporting events in Japan, but the Blue Jays are, and that matters. The cultural element here cannot be overstated. Baseball is absolutely massive in Japan, and the storylines surrounding Japanese players in MLB get followed religiously over there. The Dodgers have dominated that narrative for the last few years with Ohtani, Yamamoto, and now potentially Sasaki, But the Blue Jays are creating their own compelling narrative as the team that almost took down that super team, the organization that's building something special and competitive. For a player like A who wants to beat the Dodgers rather than join them, Toronto represents the perfect combination of competitive roster, winning culture, and the opportunity to be the featured Japanese star. From a roster construction standpoint, adding A makes a ton of sense for what the Blue Jays are trying to build. You'd be looking at a rotation with Kevin Gausman anchoring things, Shane Bieber in that second spot, assuming health, and then you've got Trey Savage alongside E fighting for those 3 and 4 spots in the rotation. Jose Barrios or Eric Lauer rounds out the 5 spot, and suddenly you've got legitimate starting pitching depth for the first time in years. That's a rotation that can compete in October, especially when you pair it with the offensive firepower Toronto already has. The age factor is huge here too. AI is 27 years old, which means you're getting his age 28 through 33 seasons on a 6-year deal. Those should be his absolute prime years as a starting pitcher. Compare that to some of the other options on the free agent market who are already in their early 30s, and the value proposition shifts significantly. You're not paying for decline years on the back end of this contract. You're paying for peak performance when the Blue Jays championship window is wide open. The risk-reward calculation on a player like A is always going to be debated, but the reality is that Toronto needs to take some calculated swings if they want to get back to the World Series and actually win it this time. Playing it safe and going after the sure-thing veteran who might give you 3 solid years before declining isn't going to cut it. The Blue Jays need to add young talent that can grow with this core, and EI fits that profile perfectly. Yeah, there's uncertainty about how his stuff will translate against major league hitters, but there's also the very real possibility that he becomes a number 2 starter on a championship caliber team. What makes this even more compelling is that the Blue Jays wouldn't just be getting an elite pitcher, they'd be making a statement about their place in the international baseball landscape. Landing A would prove that Toronto can compete for top Japanese talent against the big market teams, that they can sell players on the competitive environment and winning culture they've built. That kind of organizational credibility matters when you're trying to attract other free agents down the line, both from Japan and everywhere else. The comments from EI about wanting to beat the Dodgers and preferably doing so from a team without another Japanese player on the roster are exactly the kind of competitive mindset that fits with what the Blue Jays are building. This isn't a guy looking for the easiest path to a ring or the biggest market for endorsement deals. He wants to prove something, to carve out his own legacy separate from the Ohtani Yamamoto Sasaki narrative. Toronto gives him that platform while also giving him a legitimate chance to win a championship. If the Blue Jays can somehow make this happen and pair EI with another impact bat to address the offensive side, this offseason would go down as one of the most successful in franchise history. You'd be adding elite talent at a premium position while also showing the baseball world that Toronto is serious about competing for championships. That combination of talent, acquisition, and organizational perception shift is exactly what championship teams are built on, and Tatsuya A might be the perfect player to help make it happen.